on the show today, Liana Netto. So Liana is been recommended to me because we're reaching out across the world, and often we have American guests, sometimes British guests, maybe German if we're lucky. And I was like, we don't have many people from South America, and I've always loved Brazil, and I was actually going to be going there for the winter. In the end, they changed the rules and I went to Madeira, where I am now. But I was going to go. So I reached out to some teachers and we thought, you know what, let's make this a bit more international. That's kind of part of our thing. So welcome.
So grateful to be here, Mark, and to receive this open space for our South American voices and accents. I hope you listeners will enjoy also our conversation.
Yeah, so you sometimes describe yourself as a somatic therapist, Jungian therapist, dancer, mover. You've got a few hats. What do you say? Like if you're at a party and someone says, what do you do?
Well, in a party, I would say I'm an adventurer. I'm a curious person that cannot fit just in one hat, in one definition. But in a more formal way, I started with a Jungian psychologist, trying to find myself in theories that could help me to see the words and to help myself and to help people through these theories. And then with about 10, 15 years working with analytical approach, I noticed that I need some support to deal with more psychopathology, acute experiences. And so I add the somatic support. And I dance between these two, the symbolic support and the somatic support. And I find this matching, this marriage, very interesting.
Okay, so let's take a step back. How did you get interested in this in the first place? I definitely want to come back to Jung and all this area, but what was there an experience? Was it a gradual drift? Did you have crazy parents like the rest of us? Like what made what made little girl Liana say, hey, I want to be a Jungian psychologist?
Yeah, this is something interesting because usually when I talk about trauma, which is my expertise, I usually start appreciating the trauma. We usually say trauma is the terrific, the terrible experiences that find us, but also trauma brings the big evolutionary support for our growth. And I found, of course, psychology through this support of trauma, this help of trauma. I would be a dancer. I was actually a professional dancer, and I had some big problems in my knee and my legs, and I had to stop dancing. At this point, my parents were separating, and I were really disoriented, looking for how can I build my professional life without my legs. And psychology came to my life. I start to experience analysis, and this to be able to experience this helped me to comprehend that this was what the force, the inspiration I would like to give to my creative work.
It makes sense. And I literally don't know if you have legs because we're on Zoom. So you said without your legs, do you mean you injured your legs or you lost your legs? Just I'm not joking. I literally have no idea.
Yeah, no, I injured. Yes, it's an
we only see the top half, right? Like it's 50% of the human we're seeing on Zoom. Actually, you don't know if I've got very short but strong legs, and it's like they're good for airplanes. They're not too long. But it's like we literally only see 50% of a person on Zoom, right?
Yeah, well, working with the somatic approach, we ask people to move, to be on their feet and to experience movement so that we can add for our conversation the body whispers, the body information, the body orientation. And this is something that I really would like to share with you, with the listeners. How can we appreciate our body moving through symbolic and somatic ways of being life.
Okay.
So I have legs. So I have legs.
It's okay if you do or don't. I'm just curious when you said that. I was like, wow, I literally don't even know that about this human. So let's start with like what's Jungian psychology. I mean, I first discovered Jung when I was at 16, so I've got some experience with Jung. And then sort of Jordan Peterson made Jung famous again in the West, you know, best-selling Canadian author. First famous Jungian, I think, there's been in some years. But for anyone who's maybe doesn't from the scratch, like how would you describe a Jungian approach to psychology, first of all?
Mm-hmm. I would describe a psychology that starts with a question that is, for what are you living this? The Jungian approach is how it's usually said, a teleological approach. I mean, you move toward a way to be time, moment to moment, closer to who you really are. And through this journey, we need the first moment to differentiate from the unconscious. In Jungian perspective, the conscious emerge from the unconscious. It means that it in a different way from Freudian psychology. We don't comprehend the unconscious reserve just the traumatic or repressed continents, but we have some continents. Contents. We have some content that is our potential, our latent potential. What's something that we will going to discover in ourselves. So this is a big question. For what are you living what you're living?
For what? So meaning, I think it seems to be a big part of Jungian work.
Purpose, a sense of purpose.
Okay, purpose. So the sense of purpose and meaning. And I mean, often Jung's, I was, you know, as a teenager obsessed with sex and spirituality. And someone said, well, Freud covers the sex, but you need to read Jung to cover the spirituality. And he is often sort of the analyst. So it's about the unconscious, depth psychology, symbolism, very strong, but also this sense of collective symbolism, right? Not just personal. Yeah. Cultural studies, touches on anthropology. And someone said to me, hey, if you're interested in spirituality, then you've got to read Jung. That was the first recommendation I had.
Yeah. So the question is, you cannot go into a spirituality without a body and without your dark part, your experience, sensations and feelings. So it's not something about let this to go into the light of spirituality. This we would call much more, how would I say?
New Age bullshit.
New Age bullshit, yes. And behaviors of much more flight behavior.
Okay.
To go away of what is inside you. So we must go into to dive into ourselves, our light and our darkness, and make a reunion of both things. Through this perspective, I would say the goal of our consciousness, our work, our maturity, is to hold the polarity through a non-duality perspective. It's not easy because life is so much defined by right and wrong and North Hemisphere and South Hemisphere, beauty and beautiful and ugly. So how can we hold these polarities inside us without this duality? How can you comprehend that both of these, the shit and the beauty composes us? This is a very non-pathological way to look for the person, the client, the patient who is in front of me.
Yeah, like you mentioned, this sort of growth approach of Jungian analysis, which is sort of in keeping with a lot of modern coaching and some modern therapy approaches. But so much of looking at trauma has only been through a pathology lens, by definition, usually like what's wrong with you. And, the sort of Freudian, it's a doctor and, what's broken, what's wrong with you, rather than what potential do you have? Like that seems to be a kind of characteristic of Jungian work. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, you were right. And to comprehend also that to treat pathology is much less than to promote health. So there is at Jungian approach a whole perspective of what health is. And it's a very, very beautiful psychology, symbolic psychology that help us to comprehend that we are art. We have much more beauty inside us. And this is something that a psychedelic wave that is waking up in this moment to bring the revolution humanity needs. We need this revolution to comprehend that we are much more similar than different, and we have much more beauty and similarities. And Jungian bring this, the comprehension of we have the sense of healthiness inside us. This is the movement of our soul, we can say like that.
Mm-hmm. And the sort of balance of masculine and feminine always struck me about Jungian work, animus, and also even just historically, like, Jung had several very well-known female students who created the MBTI or a lot of the early dance movement therapists, right? I mean, Jungian work was much more embodied than Freudian work very quickly because of all the generally female German, Swiss, kind of Central European dance therapists who quite immediately after Jung were at work, right? There was a certain balance, I would say, there.
Yeah. We cannot look the theory without the context, the historical context of the theory. And of course, looking through our lens, our modern lens, there are many things that we can develop and we can have the inspiration of the historic aspect of Jung, including this connection between anima and animus, the polarity, that it was much more how can I say, heteronormative? Is this word works for you? Mm-hmm. Heteronormative.
Or heteronormative, like, yeah, men should be one way, women should be another, and so the
so this comprehension of what woman was supposed to be and man was supposed to be, but he brings us the start of the comprehension that we have both of this energy, this archetypal energy inside us. And we can dance through this both energies. So we can look for modern families and we can see, for example, hetero couples that are hetero-affected, and we can see them, the woman is much more young or animals and masculine energy. It doesn't mean anything about her sexual orientation or even about her sexual identity or gender identity. And the same thing, the man could be very feminine. It has nothing to do with the orientation or the gender identity. But we can dance through this aspect, archetypal aspects inside us. And the very end of the meaning of a relationship is really to waken up the both part inside us and to promote this marriage inside us. So our relationships, our romantic relationships, they are made to help in our inner marriage, our inner relationship.
Yeah. And you mentioned trauma a couple of times. That's, I know, one of your main areas. Is there a Jungian approach to trauma? I mean, people may be used to kind of biological approaches and polyvagal theory and Peter Levine, and this is pretty common for listeners to be aware of these things. But I don't often hear of a Jungian approach to trauma. What would that be?
Yeah, he would say about the complex theory. The complex theory says that when we have some experience that has energy, has vital energy, has libido, how we would say, but is opposite, it's very hard for the ego as a containment to deal with. part of this energy, traumatic energy, will be repressed to the unconscious. But as it is repressed to unconscious, it usually couples with some archetypal aspects. For example, the complex of mother, the complex of father, the complex of anima and animals, complex of child. So we can see this, how the energy, the complex is made by an archetype and a trauma, and how this is formative for our personality. So Jung comprehends that the trauma is a force, a power that is formative for our personality, because how you deal with this, let's say metaphorically, these organs inside you, this father archetype, this mother archetype, this wisdom, this older, this ancient archetype, this childhood, this child archetype, how you deal, how you dance with all these aspects inside you creates who you are. So again, brings not only the bad, but we never know which trauma sustain our whole personality.
It's interesting, this word archetype's kind of a famous word now, and I think it was Jung who originated this word, I believe. And I notice people relate to me in several levels. One can be a personal level, like Mark, but then they'll also relate to me as dad, if they're younger sometimes, or the husband, or, you know, when I was younger, I used to get the sort of the wild son kind of archetype, you know, and I notice I get caught by archetypes. I find, you know, like I was found myself, I was just having a drink with these two young Polish women a couple of nights ago, and I found myself becoming very paternal towards them. And they sort of, I shifted from sort of potential lover to dad figure. And it was like we fell, and it was okay. It was appropriate at the time. They were quite a lot younger than me. And, you know, I was like, don't drink too much, and you're going to get home safely, and I'll buy you a drink. Don't worry, you know, and sort of looking after them a little bit. And I was like, oh, we've sort of fallen into something that's much bigger than this friendship between individuals. And it strikes me, if I don't understand people's relationships to some of these archetypes, and I'm missing a layer that it's not personal. It's not about Mark or about Kasia. It's something bigger than us. This strikes me as a sort of very Jungian way of looking at things.
Yeah, some things that you can go into and you can go out and you can learn through this movement. But when you get stuck, when you get identified with some of these personas, these roles, these archetypes, you lose the flux, the flow of who you are, which is composed by all of this, but not defined by none of this.
So we're not limited to an. So some people, for example, their trauma is they have to be the victim, or they have to never be the victim. There's a have to, right? Like I always have to be this independent, you know, warrior. I can't ever be vulnerable or weak. I have to be tough. This archetype is, this warrior archetype is there, or a joker. There's two of my favorite ones. You know, I'm always having to be the guy who's having fun and joking, and actually that's a limitation because sometimes life is serious. Or I have to be the seductress. I've got one student who's just kind of like oozing seduction. Very common in Brazil, I found out when I was there years ago. And she's just dripping seduction. And it's like, stop it. Not now. Save that for your partner. Is this what you're talking about? The way we attach to archetypes and they become define us rather than simply things we can dance in and out of?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. At my office, I have images of a dragon. And sometimes people ask me, why do you like so much a dragon so that you put this in the door of your office? And I say, usually people come into me, bring in me their dragons, bring in me their other parts, bring me their trauma. And I am the one who comprehends that every time I find a dragon, I find a lion, I find a guardian of the portal, I know that there is further a princess that is asleep princess. I find how do I say elixir?
Elixir.
Elixir, yes, of the long life, of the eternal life. I have the treasure. I have something that is so important for me. And this is part of this aspect that we are discussing about Jungian psychologists. I look for you and I know that you're not defined by what you're bringing to me, your pain, your victim. I know that's much more new and I can relate and appreciate with all these dentures inside and outside you. And I can bring much more confidence for if a survival come to me and brings all this pain, what protects including me to not be overwhelmed by these histories that many times is very, very intense, is to know that there's something. If the person survived, the person is stronger, is bigger than the experience that match him, that encountered him, her. So this is a way to hold the experience, not being attached, not being defined, but to encounter flow through the the beauty, the terrible and the terrific of the experience.
Terrible and terrific, I like it. Better English than mine. I love that phrase. So it strikes me as well that knowing that there's something bigger, something like one of my colleagues is getting married right now. And I'm like, hey, you're not the first person to be married. And even if you're not Christian or not, you don't want a white wedding dress, you want a black wedding dress because you're a different style, it's still worth being aware of some of the symbolism. Or I remember we used to give a bokken, a wooden sword, to students on a course, and they loved it. And then you watch Star Wars, and they get the lightsaber, or King Arthur, and it's the sword. You know, there was something that was beyond them at work, even if they didn't know why they loved the sword, they just loved the sword. Even, you know, there was sort of middle-aged businesswomen that had never done martial arts in their life, and they love the sword. And because there's something reassuring in that, particularly if you're going through something strong, like a wedding or a funeral, you know, something powerful, something that's been done 1,000 times throughout human history in 1,000 cultures. And this, when there's trauma or difficulty, there's something reassuring to be like, there's a bigger thing here. There's a wider picture than just the sort of little individualized me. Does that make any kind of sense?
I'm not sure if I could follow all of your ideas. Sometimes it would be good to speak slower for me.
It also wasn't a coherent thread. I mean, it was just a blur. So
okay. Thank you. But some things emerge on me that I would like, some ideas that I'd like to share with you, and you let me know if this matches what you were sharing or not, or we can make another thread. We as human, we need some marks, and our lives is marked through very specific, intense moments, which are not only personal, which are collective moments. Trauma defines these moments where we say life is one after and one before, and marriages and births and deaths. So these are very crucial moments that we can comprehend them as archetypal moments. Once every one of us will live this in different ways through a testimony of something very important for me, living like a birth, even if I never had this experience of birth, I can join, I can experience it like a testimony. And these crucial moments, these archetypal moments that very often has this power to be shared and to be ritualized. We have this hunger as a human being. We have hunger of rituals to define and to help us move in. Rituals is a way for our conscience to make crossing, to make movement.
And do you think, I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, is this a danger of a multicultural society? So on the one hand, I've traveled a lot, And it's great when you go to a wedding because you go, oh, it's a wedding. And they might be dressed differently. And maybe they're smashing a glass or they're doing some gypsy thing or Jewish thing I don't understand. But I can be at a wedding. I go to a wedding in Poland. I've been at weddings in Israel. I go, it's a wedding. I get it. Well, I got married to someone from the Ukraine. My Irish family had no real problems figuring, okay, they've got a tradition, but okay, it's a wedding because it's archetypal. So it brings us together. And we live in a time of really reduced ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Like symbolism kind of like it's universal, but like it feels like we're a little bit starving for ritual and symbolism. Like my friend, my colleague who's getting married and thought, oh, I just throw out any tradition because she doesn't agree with a lot of Catholic stuff and Christian stuff. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But like, for example, I'm in Madeira right now, Portuguese island, and there's still kind of a strong traditional kind of Catholic kind of feel here. And like in some ways that's limiting, but in other ways, I think, well, at least they've got these solid traditions. And there's not like in London where, less than 50% of people in London are British. And so you've got such a mix, literally, I think it's 30% white British and maybe 50% were only been British for like, so 2 generations. So many cultural backgrounds, which is normally a great thing, for food and for, genetics and things. But it confuses any sense of what the ritual is. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get married when everyone's from everywhere and nowhere?
Yeah. As ritual has also an archetypal and a cultural aspect, rituals goes evolving also. So it goes changing also. And we have many other ways of ritualizing, like movies are a way of creating symbols and rituals for us.
Yeah,
superhero movies. You are saying to me the Star Wars. It was a movie as a way to access archetypal symbols.
Yeah, so, Hollywood's ruined that recently because now movies are nearly all very political in a way, which I think, like the new Star Wars, for example, have destroyed the symbolism and replaced it with just neo-Marxist awfulness. And like they've fucked with the symbolism in a way, which I think no one got how damaging that was. Like from the early, say, Matrix, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, there was a Jungian symbolism to those movies that I see in the modern movies is bankrupt. It's not really there. And I think people haven't realized the cost of it, actually.
Yeah. I know. I agree with what you're bringing. And we are moving as we grow as collective, as a species, we are finding the worst part of us, which is what you are describing, and the most beautiful part of us. Now in Brazil, we have maybe a most terrible government we've ever had. It's really a very violent. He's very violent in his words, and he's normalizing the violence. So people are becoming accepted with their violence and their discrimination.
Brazil's been a deeply violent society for a long time. I mean, it sounds like you haven't integrated your inner fascist properly there. I mean, like, the worst president from a liberal point of view, right? I'm sure conservatives wouldn't say he was the worst president ever.
Yeah, they would not say. But one thing we need to agree, and they agree, the conservatives agree, they say, oh yeah, they are very natural, authentic, and impulsive, saying all these words. Right. So everyone agreed that he say these words. And with that, what I invite you to reflect is when an empowered person say these words, this person is normatizing and normalizing violence. And what we are seeing.
So just to jump one thing you said there, I thought was interesting, that there was an impulsivity to Trump. And the Brazilian president is often compared to, it's the South American Trump. There's an impulsivity Well, and as you say, both sides perhaps would agree, like, hey, he just says it like it is. And that normalization of, I'd rather not call that violence, I would call it impulsivity or immaturity, perhaps. Like that I'm curious why that suddenly become, in a space of 10 years, look at how mature Obama was. Even if you disagreed with his policies, there was a dignity and a maturity. And that impulsivity, again, you might like Trump's policies, but you wouldn't deny that there's a certain kind of like psychological, like tweeting at 4 a.m, saying things, and Boris Johnson has this same feature in the UK. I find him quite lovable in many ways, though I don't agree with his policies. Maybe it's just because we're both ADHD, but he will sort of blurt things out that are slightly inappropriate for a prime minister. But I'm curious about that in our leadership, sort of globally emerging as a new norm.
Yeah, I'd like to answer you with an archetypal response and myth, Egypt's myth of Isis and Osiris.
Okay.
The story tells us that Osiris was a very nice king, a very pacific, a very dignity, and treats people with a lot of dignity. And his brother, which is the other part, the brotherhood means the other part of us, and the seen through a symbolical way. So his other part, his brother, was very, very, very evil, very. No, he would like to has what he has. He would like to jealous. Thank you. So he was very jealous about Osiris, and he would try to kill Osiris so he would be able to be the king. And he made a lot of things. At the end, he cut Osiris in many, many pieces and throw these pieces of Osiris at the Nilo River. And when when Isis discovered that Isis was her consort, her female part, and again, it doesn't matter if Isis was a man or a woman. The consort here means that he, it represents the archetypal part of love, of compassion. And this part moves toward bringing these pieces together with a shaman, which is Anubis. The shaman was half part man, half part an animal. It means we bring 3 aspects together for this healing, to bring again Osiris remembered, and which were the love, the instinct, the body, the animal, and the humanity, the way to give sense and propose or what Osiris have lived. So together, these 3 elements were able to put these fragmented pieces of Osiris, which is a very beautiful way to comprehend trauma. Our goal of deal with trauma was not to remember in a way of recounting, retelling, but to remember in a way of reconnecting these fragmented parts. And then Osiris was not just a man, a living man. He have going through the land of the died people, and he would be able now to dance, to cross this linear, this threshold of environments, of places. And he was not able to govern, to be a king of the men, of humanity. So his son, which is the symbol of the sun that rises. So his son assumes the kingdom. And Set, the brother of Osiris, was still jealous about the son, and still was fighting with Osiris, Isis, Anubis. I forget now the name of the Isis child.
Okay.
Do you know the name of Isis child?
Not, I do not. My Egyptian mythology is lacking.
Uh,
But the basic idea is what?
the basic idea is that the son that assumes the kingdom is the symbol of the sun, and Set, the brother, still is fighting with this son. So the story tells that this fight is not end, has not approached an end. At this moment, sometimes the sun is able to win the battle, and so the order, the beauty and the kindness and the compassion rules over the world. And sometimes Set gains the battle, and then the disorder, the chaos, the ugly, the trauma rules the world. And it is an archetypal movement to move through both of them until now. So this is the story.
Yeah, I would strongly argue against aligning our political positions with good and those we disagree with as evil. I think that's an extremely unintegrated position. And while I'm for psychologically mature leaders, and I, from what I see, I don't have a strong opinion about the Brazilian president. What I see, probably not the nicest human being. I think it's a misuse of psychology to say our political position is the good one and the other, because that's just saying the other guys are bad guys, and there's no integration, there's no conversation at that point.
Yeah, but we can see is that in both sides we have some darkness aspect and some beautiful aspect. And what I would say before, in this moment that we have an increase, a very great increase of violence, we also has a very great increase of reflexive about the violence, how to deal with violence, how to learn through violence. So we see inside, we have this polarization, the more left government, more right and conservative government, and we go moving from one to another. And inside them, we have good and bad. So it's really the point that I'd like to approach. That at this moment, we can see both the violence and reflexive and the growth.
And we have about 10 minutes. I'd love to talk about Brazil a little bit, because we don't have many Brazilian guests on. I love Brazil. It's been 15 years since I've been there, but I have a lot of fondness for the culture. And, you talk about the terrific and the terrible, the light and the dark. I mean, I know no better way to describe Brazil. When people say to me, what was Brazil like? I said, well, it's the best place I've ever been. And it was also a fucking nightmare. I was around a lot of violence in the favelas, and I really saw the best of Brazil, celebrating and natural beauty. And I had a wonderful girlfriend and really good friends I did martial arts with, and it was a wild, fun party, but it was also just shockingly scary and terrible. And there's very few places I would describe like that. It's like I'm describing Afghanistan and a holiday in Italy at the same time. Like this sort of light and dark juxtaposition or contrast. That, I mean, am I touching on something culturally here as well?
Yeah, so you can see this in Brazil, inside Brazil, and we can see this in all development, in developing or subdeveloped cultures, as a polarization and complementary aspect of the developed world. So if we see we are going again into the political discussion, because the big part of our violence was made by what the colonization bring to us, and still are doing with our primary resources, our natural resources. So
it's huge natural resources, Like, who's taking those? Like,
Yes. Well, political. It's really a political issue. So, I mean, you can see this with a very micro length, or you can see this in a very, as the global, the word as one. We see this polarization in places that has not experienced much violence as what we are experiencing, in a way put violence through their basement. We are the basement.
Well, I guess what struck me about Brazil was the closeness to the surface of both joy and violence. So, like, I was watching a Brazilian person talk to a Portuguese person the other day, and no offense to Portugal, but the Portuguese person looked fucking miserable. They just looked so sad compared to the Brazilian, who just looked joyful and open and happy. And the Portuguese was doing that fado, slightly depressed thing. And the Brazilian just looks so happy compared to the Portuguese. And I can see who's Brazilian when I'm walking down the street in Portugal or Madeira, because they're more open and more happy. And it's lovely. And simultaneously, there's a lot of violence in Brazil, and there has been for a long time, even compared to other countries that may be poor, like, I don't know, India used to be, or parts of Africa. I've been in much safer African countries than Brazil. And like that juxtaposition of joy and friendliness and openness. I've had some fantastic Brazilian friends and lovers. And simultaneously, the darkness and the violence, that is a bit different. That's not the same as elsewhere. Or am I mischaracterizing?
Yeah, there's a music they say that says we cannot have samba, we cannot have music, you cannot have art without so much sadness. Sadness is the primer motor of the art. So we have this ability of flexibility. You know what I'm doing here? I'm exercising my flexibility because I really have a hard time with English. And I'm dancing through ways to offer my voices for people that feels like me. And more of that. It means I'm experiencing now the hard time of dressing my ideas with a 7-year-old language, which is much harder.
Liana, your English is much more beautiful than most of our American guests. Okay, let me really reassure you that's absolutely true. And it is particularly Brazilian to be worried about English. I used to find this in Brazil all the time. Brazilians would say, oh, my English is terrible. And it was really good. And I'm not sure why this insecurity happens. It's very common. I used to teach English there. So I used to
because this cuts the flows of the flow of our thinking. And this is a very hard way to express complex thinking when you have to really think about words and how to dress this. So really, I cannot let you know.
You're eloquent, though. You're eloquent on this. You expressed yourself beautifully. Why do Brazilians find that hard? Whereas, say, I have German friends who speak worse English than you, who don't. And it's something, like you said, cutting the flow. There's a flowing, feeling quality to a lot of Brazilians. That authentic flow, as you say, cut. Whereas, German is cut anyway. Like what is it? There's something about that naturalness or flow getting interrupted that seems hard for people there that the German guests don't have a problem with, So,
yeah, it's very nice to listen that. It's very nice to listen that because, yes, as a country which was colonized, we have a one which is to be worse, to be not enough. And to have to do a lot of effort to appear, to be listened, to be coherent, to look coherent, so it's about this dancing that I'm doing right now of expressing my ideas and at the same time to just be in the joy of our conversation and to meet you and to maybe offer my words for other people that are listening to us.
I mean,
I'm dancing with this.
Yeah, I think your ideas have been clear, but it does make the dance more awkward. and the flow, as you say, right? And there's something that gets difficult. I experience this when I speak other languages as well. I'm, extremely clumsy in my own Portuguese at the moment, learning, though it's a beautiful language. I prefer the Brazilian Portuguese because it's easier to hear and learn. And personally, a Brazilian accent, nothing wrong with that in English, nothing wrong with that at all. And there is a sort of forgotten quality about Brazil. Like, it's one of the 10 biggest countries physically, economically, population-wise. It's in the top 10, population, economic size, physically, huge natural resources. And yet you don't hear about it like you hear about a lot of countries. Maybe it's a linguistic thing. It's kind of like over there in the Southern Hemisphere. It's one of the rising powers of the world. And frankly, I'd rather Brazil and India be in charge than China. Those are sort of three future masters of the world: Brazil, China, and India, rather than the EU and America. But somehow it's invisible. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't, even in South America, where everybody else speaks Spanish.
Yeah, I think that's about this wound that I'm telling you. That was the purpose of me accepting your invitation to be here for people just listening my English. That's what this proposed, to receive visibility and to experience the joy through the imperfection, to experience the joy.
Imperfection, one of my favorite things about Brazil. I think people from countries that are or used to be dominant, so Russia, UK, United States, these are countries that are either, or China, these are countries that have been dominant or are currently. Britain and Russia's a little bit faded, but you still got the memory of being grand. It's very different than, say, my friends who are from Slovenia, which has never had an empire, or a country in the developing world. And I do see this slight insecurity that sort of can hold people back. I find it difficult to get guests from countries that aren't from Germany, England, or United States. And people feel cautious or shy or embarrassed. And sometimes it's language, sometimes it's like, I'm not important enough. And I find that that's maybe a kind of privilege that I would have coming from England that would be quite invisible to most English people, actually, or most Dutch people for that matter.
Yeah, that's it. So thank you for this. This is a kind of activism you are doing. We are.
A pleasure. And if you have any other good Brazilian guests, put them forward. I hope to come to Brazil next winter. Didn't work out this winter because the policies changed. But next winter, it's my plan, either Thailand or Brazil. I don't like English winters. I don't like it. So Madeira was a bit of a compromise, So yeah, where do people? I need to go in a minute. So where do people find you? Can they find you online? If they're in Brazil, do you have a website, books in Portuguese, anything at all? Let us know.
I have a website. My name, Liana Netto. Would you please spell it?
Lian for November, A, Netto, N for November, ETTO.
Yeah, .com.br. It's my website. And then you have there my agenda, and maybe this same name you find me on Instagram. I have some articles that you can find at PubMed. So, well,
people can Google you. You have a plate kind of thing behind you that I thought was like a presidential symbol. You just lean your head. People not on YouTube won't be able to see. I thought that was the presidential symbol, the American one, but I thought she's the president. In Bahia. And what's the snake? Last question. You have a snake on your wrist and a snake ring. Is this the sort of infinity Jungian symbol? What's snake charming lady? What is with the snakes?
Yeah. Well, this is a personal story. When I were about 20 years, I always loved snake, really, a physical and animal snake. And I am the kind of woman that can get a snake in the arm in natural environment. I don't grab it, but if the snake is calm enough and want to talk with me, I go and talk with her. And then once I get a snake and she wrapped in my arm, this really arm. And then she wouldn't leave me. I tried to let
snake.
her. Yeah, it was a coral snake.
Listen, I think the Christians gave snakes a bad name with that whole Bible thing. The Garden of Eden, as I've always thought snakes were just dragons with their wings cut off, and I love dragons. So I actually have
this
a
is
now because I'm
this
busting to the toilet, so I do need to end this. This has been wonderful, though, really juicy and different, which I appreciate. I appreciate it's not being like most interviews. So I need to run because I'm going to be teaching in a minute. So thank you so much. Muito obrigado. Falamos Português agora, Linda. Tudo bem. That's about it.
De nada, foi o meu prazer estar aqui com você.
Prazer, muito prazer.
Muito prazer.